Well, I must say I'm exhilarated and enthusiastic about hearing these stories. My story is a lot more benign, fortunately. I want to start off, I'm going to talk about motivational issues in smart recovery, but I do want to take 2 minutes to talk about spirituality. I give a lot of introductory talks. Can you hear me in the back okay? I give a lot of introductory talks, and sometimes I talk to professionals and somebody says, well, what do you have in your program about spirituality? Because they believe somehow this is integral to recovery. Smart isn't spiritual. So about 6 years ago, we had our first Smart Recovery Conference in the UK. It was in London. It was sponsored by Alcohol Concern. It was a big conference. There were about 250 people there. And it was really the first exposure, national exposure here in the UK for smart recovery. At the end, I was again mistakenly introduced as the founder of Smart Recovery. There were 9 of us who were involved deeply and incorporated. I think it was 7 professionals and 2 peers. At any rate, the conference was very successful. It was over. Everybody was pouring out. There were a few people left. I was struggling to get into my coat. And some young man, well-dressed young man, walked up to me, stuck out his hand. So I put out my hand, shook my hand. He looked me in the eye and he said, "I owe you my life." And then he turned around and walked out. Was that a spiritual moment? You bet it was, okay? I've had the most spiritual moments in my life, many of them, in smart recovery meetings, when the light goes on behind somebody's eyes. When I watched Lee Proctor's YouTube presentation the first time, I had tears streaming down my face. Unbelievable impact. Was that a spiritual moment? You bet it was. So there's plenty of spirituality, no matter how you define it, in smart recovery, despite our structure and our scientific tools and everything else. There's a lot of heart in it, and it's real. We're training about 200 new facilitators a month in the US with our online training program, online interactive training program. And everybody, I get a printout every month of everybody who's doing it, where they're from, their email address, and then there's the last column, says, why do you want to be a facilitator? And there's all kinds of mundane reasons, because now about almost 2/3 are professionals. Every month, there's 2 or 3 people say, "Smart saved my life." And there's probably 4 or 5 say, "Smart changed my life." Okay, that's spiritual. That's as spiritual as it can get. Now, let's get down to some technical issues. When we started doing smart recovery, at that time it was called rational recovery, and it was a 2-point program. And after about 6 months or so, I got interested. I read about stages of change, and I realized that maybe there's some people in our programs that weren't really ready for change in the way that we were expecting. I took little polls and meetings and so forth. I found out, hey, there's a lot of people in recovery meetings who don't want to recover. And I tried to educate myself about what they were doing there, a lot of different reasons. I won't bore you with them, but I came back to the board and they said, hey, we need some motivational tools. Motivation is critical. I give a lot of introductions, as I said, and sometimes people say, well, what's the most important thing to lead to recovery? What's the most important thing? So I say, motivation, number 1, motivation. Number 2, motivation. Number 3, motivation. If you're really motivated, you'll find something, you'll find some program, or you'll just do it. We know with alcohol, about 30% of people who are addicted to alcohol stop on their own and stay stopped. With cigarettes, millions have done it. And that's a serious, serious addiction, difficult to stop. But, so we wanted to boost people up, boost up their motivation. We started with CBAs. I don't know who actually introduced the concept, but we started with that. And I'll come to that later. And I want to talk first about something that I invented called hierarchy of values. And I'll tell you how I came about it. I was at a meeting, and there was a gentleman there, retired lawyer, about 75 years old, had plenty of money, was been struggling with trying to stop for many, many, many years. And the occasion of him coming to the meeting was he'd been to his doctor's office, and they had the blood drawn, and it came back with abnormal liver tests. And the doctor said, hey, you're in trouble. You better stop your drinking because it's inflaming your liver, so forth and so on. The other instigation was, as we found out over a period of weeks that he was coming to the meeting, week after week, 6 weeks, so he revealed these various things in the check-in. He said to his wife, first of all, he tried to stop, and the way that he tried to stop was, I'll only drink on occasions. So what's an occasion? Anniversary, a wedding, birthday, Thursday, Tuesday, Friday afternoon. Okay, so this is what happened. 2 or 3 times he tried this. It always decayed into daily drinking. He said to his wife, hey, let's go out to lunch today. She said, great idea. So they drove to a restaurant, and he said, well, wait a minute, it looks kind of crowded. Let me go in and see if they have a table. So he ran into the restaurant. He found out it was a 30-minute wait. So he came out, he said, well, we can't go, there's a 30-minute wait. She said, well, let's go to the Chinese restaurant down the street. He said, okay. He said, oh, wait a minute. He ran out, he went back to the maitre d', gave him $10, and he got a table, and he said, come on. And the reason was, no liquor at the Chinese restaurant, okay? So somehow this made some kind of impact on him, embarrassed him. He said, you know, this is embarrassing, this is humiliating to me that I did this. Anyway, he showed up at the meeting 6 weeks in a row. He also told us that his favorite thing in the world was trips to Italy. He loved Italy. He went every year for 3 weeks, and he often took members of the family and everything. But this year, he had made all the arrangements, and then he canceled them. Because he said, what good is a trip to Italy? Any Italians here? Good. What good is a trip to Italy if you can't have a glass of wine with dinner? Worthless, right? Okay, so he canceled the trip. Can you get a glass of wine with dinner in Italy at a restaurant? Pretty tough, right? So anyway, the whole thing is bogus, but that's what he said. Now, he comes to his 6th meeting now. Same story, still vacillating, still ambivalent, and I could see the people, it was bad body language. You know, they were starting to go like this and like that, and oh, yeah. You know, this guy just, it was week after week, I'm not sure, I don't know, and so forth. So I said, well, I have to do something different. And it leaped into my mind Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I said, look, let's do something. Were you willing to do we'll call it hierarchy of values? He said, okay. So here's what went down. I said, I want you to tell me in rank order of importance all those things that are important to you. Hierarchy of values. 1, he said, my wife. 2, he said, my sisters. Now, he had a very unusual relationship with his sisters. They always lived in the same area. They always interacted. They were always in each other's houses. They went on trips together and everything. Very close to his sisters. Then he said, my kids. He had 2 sons, grown with families. Then he said, my health, which we know about because his doctor told him he better stop. And then finally, he put one of his most important values, trips to Italy. Okay, now, I looked at that. You look at it. Anything missing from his value system that he's declaring? Alcohol, right? I was kind of shocked. I said, well, wait a minute. This guy, his whole life has just been turmoil now because of alcohol, and he doesn't consider it an important value. So I said, well, what about alcohol? He said, alcohol isn't a value. He's a lawyer. Alcohol isn't a value. I said, well, how about access to alcohol? That's a value. He said, no, I don't think so. Anyway, we went on with the meeting. You know, using motivational interviewing principles. We didn't say, gotcha. You know, you screwed. No, we said, we dropped it there and we went on. And the next meeting, we came to the meeting, we're doing the check-in, we get around to him, he says, I've decided to stop drinking. So I said to myself, wow, this is really important. This was only about 12 years ago, so maybe 17 years I've been in smart recovery. Now I finally wake up and find out values are important in motivating people to recovery. It's not just the pile up of crap and disappointments and destructiveness and everything. It's that they have a value system, and violating it over and over and over again becomes destructive and erosive, corrosive to their spirit and their soul, really. So I started doing this. I went with him. I said, what effect does alcohol have on your wife? She hates it. We argue all the time. She says, how about the sisters? They beg me to stop. We're fighting all the time about it. What about the kids? Ditto. What about the doctor, their health? Okay, that's obvious. What about the trips to Italy? I gave it up because we were going to have a glass of wine with dinner. So I started doing this. I've probably done about 150 times now. And certain generalities have arisen. First of all, you know, nobody ever says, when I say, what are your important values? Nobody says democracy. Is that an important value? Okay. Nobody says the right to vote. Okay? Nobody says freedom, even. I do it in prison. People don't say freedom, okay? You know? So this is the kind of stuff they put down, generally speaking. They put this, they compress it into the important personal things. Now, interestingly, we had a facilitator named Lee Hapur, and she said, I've decided I'm going to do this for a group now. Now, this works as an individual, okay? This is an individual technique. So when she did it as a group, we got a different list of things. When you do it as a group, you get freedom, integrity, honesty, loyalty, you know, all the great virtues of classical and secular and religious society when you do it as a group. But as an individual, this is generally the kind of stuff you get. Once in a while, last week I did it with someone, they said, number one, being a better human being, which is terrific. But it's very seldom that this kind of thing, this kind of moral kind of ethical kind of idea comes up. So you can do it for individuals, you can do it in a group. Now, one thing that was fascinating to me as I went on doing this was almost no one, no matter how bad things were for them, no matter how destructive their habit was, almost no one ever wrote down as a value their drug or their access or their gambling or anything like that. It never appeared here. Now you know, and I know, that it's got to be on this list, right? Because they're at a recovery meeting. They are in big trouble. They have overcome that inestimable barrier of walking through the door to a recovery meeting. This is one of the toughest choices anyone ever makes. Sometimes people, years and years, they think about it before they cross the threshold. I met a guy who went to 3 AA meetings, walked around the parking lot for a half hour smoking cigarettes and never went in, okay? This is a big inhibition. So by the time they were in a recovery meeting, they had plenty of trouble, and yet they don't put it down. And this always intrigued me. I said, why doesn't anybody mention it? Now, a few people mentioned it. I was doing meetings at a center for homeless addicted men. Is this bottom? Homeless addicted men, okay? And they're probably in meetings all day and job searches and whatever. And I said, who wants to do a tool, a smart recovery tool? The man puts his hand up. I said, okay. I told him about it. I said, okay, number one, he says, abstinence. Oh, I said, what the heck is this all about? I never heard that. At that point, I had never heard anything about abstinence, sobriety, drinking, drug, anything, nothing came up in the values. The next week, I asked the same question. Another guy got up. Number one, he said sobriety. So I'm scratching my head and say, what is going on here? Then we have a training session once a month in Massachusetts. And I presented this, and one of the facilitators said, hey, I tried it last week, and the first thing the guy said was abstinence. So I was trying to figure out what was the missing link here. Why did this happen? I was driving home, and it hit me. I called him up on the phone. I said, how did you introduce this? He said, I asked for a volunteer. Okay, the answer, don't ask for volunteers. Who's going to volunteer? Somebody who's very proud of how they're doing in recovery, all right? And they're going to know that the most important value to them is sobriety or abstinence or whatever, okay? So this tool is only useful and applicable to people who are ambivalent, who are vacillating, which is a great number of people. And it seems to be very effective in focusing them on things that are important to them. For some reason, they just didn't think about it that way. We've had a couple members of our board who say, this is what turned me. This thing turned me. Now, one of our facilitators very prudently said, hey, this is just a gimmick. And I guess it is a gimmick because you're using it and you want the person not to know the punchline, okay? If they know the punchline, like I said, it's all over. It's just like, then it is. So I said, well, you know, it is a gimmick. It is in a way a trick, but it's a trick to a good purpose. You know, it's not a practical joke like a hot foot or something, you know, or exploding cigar. When this explodes, it changes the way people think about it. That's a different thing. So this is what goes with this. Now, it's always intrigued me. Why don't they mention it? Why doesn't somebody? It's so obvious. For years, it bothered me for 2 years. I couldn't come up with it. Anybody here know what the answer is? I think you'll agree with me that this is the answer. So, shame? Yeah, I guess that's an element of it, but they're ashamed about all of these things that are affected by their drinking or drugging, whatever it is. So I was pulling away from a red light on my way to one of these training meetings, and it suddenly hit me. Don't forget where I got this. I got this from Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Oxygen, water, shelter. In the temperate climes, you don't need shelter in the Amazon, and food, and cocaine, okay? So people who are addicted, this is a need. That's why they're at a recovery meeting. They have classified this substance, you heard Shiv, classified this substance as a need. They cannot live without it. They can't face life without access to it. And they don't want to admit to themselves that it is more important to them than all the things that they say they cherish and are valuable to them. Now, we have two women, I say we, I mean the Smart Recovery Movement or whatever, from Prince Edward Island, the smallest province in Canada, and Charlotte, the capital, and I heard a radio program. Somebody streamed it to SmartCal. And they were interviewed. They wanted to do something about the addiction crisis in Prince Edward Island. They didn't personally have any trouble in their family. Some of their friends did, and they looked around for what they could do. They found Smart Recovery. They took the facilitator training. They knew nothing about it. I heard the interview. They were very sophisticated. They had taken the training, and they had profited from it. They understood it. They were able to answer the host questions, and I was pretty impressed. So I said, I got to make a mental note, go back and look in 6 months, get their address, see how they're doing. So they were virginal, really. Well, anyway, I forgot about it. I thought about it a few times. I was busy as hell. And finally, somebody streamed a newspaper article about a year later to the SmartCal, and I read the article. They had 5 meetings going, 5 in Charlotte, 1 year later. And the reason for the article was starting 2 more meetings in the suburbs, okay? This is incredible. Down in the article, they told a story. They were out shopping together in a supermarket, and they met one of the people who had been one of the attendees, been coming for 3 weeks. And they said, you know, how are you doing? He said, I'm doing great. He said, I'm going great. I haven't had a drink, and I'm feeling wonderful. So they said, well, what are you doing? He undid his sleeve like this. He rolled it up, and he showed them. It says, HOV, tattooed on his arm. He said, anytime I get an urge, I roll up my sleeve and I look at it, I I remember all the things that are important to me, and that's it. I don't have any more urge. So this is pretty impressive. Okay, now I want to move on. We'll save questions at the end if there's any time. Talk about CBAs. I made a little modification in the CBA. The CBA was wonderful. Cost-benefit analysis, the economists use it all the time. How much time do I have left? Oh, okay. So the economists use it all the time, and they try to use it to determine why is it people make certain economic decisions. But of course, it's involved in every decision. You have restaurants here, they have a salad bar, you know. Let's say all-you-can-eat salad bar. And they really have no way from stopping you all you can eat except the size of the dish, right? So you go down, and at every station, carrots, beets, lettuce, different kinds of, whatever, you have to make a decision about what you're going to do, how much room there is on the plate, and what you're going to have for dinner, and how much you want to affect their appetite, and so forth. You don't realize that. You just go down, you look at each dish. Maybe you don't know what's coming up, so you have to leave a little room. Maybe something I like. You're going to make about 30 decisions, cost-benefit decisions, based on a lot of factors, and your brain is going like a computer, you know, just telling you what to do. Now, we have certain restaurants called churrascarias or rodizios from South America, where they grill on a spit. I don't know if you have any of those here. And then they bring around the spits to the table and shave you off the meat, you know. They have really good cuts like filet mignon, and they have a top of the round, and then they go down the grade to chicken and pork, and then they end up with sausages or something. If you're dumb enough to eat the sausages, go ahead and enjoy it. Anyway, you go to their salad bar, okay? Now, here's the size of the plate. They give a huge plate, and they got soup, 3 kinds of soup, all cream soups. And what's the size of the bowl? Like this? Like that, okay? And how many items do they have on the salad bar? Anybody been to something like that? 60 items, okay? So you really got to start doing CBAs on this. You say, do I save it for the filet mignon? Or am I going to fill up on all this, which is beautifully presented and good stuff, you know, cold smoked salmon and all of that. And sure. So this is the complexity of even a simple thing like going to a salad bar. So making decisions about drugs and alcohol and gambling when you're addicted, even a little more difficult than that. Now, I noticed something, though, that was disturbing. I noticed that people seem to be equating the decisions about stopping and the decisions about keeping doing it as if they were equivalent. You go into we got donut shops in the U.S., Dunkin' Donuts, there's thousands of them. And they got about 8 or 10 different kind of donuts. There's sprinkles donuts, honey dip donuts, chocolate donuts, whatever. You go in there and say, gee whiz, tough to make a decision here. Well, should I get the sprinkles? Should I get the honey dip? Well, you know, so what is it? 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Does it really make any difference? No, one's got a few more calories, whatever. And they were handling the CBA as if that's what it was, as if it was, you know, benefits of stopping and the detriments of stopping, like they were equivalent. And of course, they're not equivalent. On the one hand, you have a good feeling, you feel good for 4 hours after a shot of heroin. On the other side, you're dead. Okay? This is not sprinkles and honey dipped, okay? This is every critical difference in emphasis. It's not trivial. This is what I call trivialization. They trivialize the decisions by making them equitable. So I started thinking about making them time-based. Now, you get a DUI. We call it a DUI. You got to get a DRI, something here. Okay. So when I started doing this program, if you had a DUI, driving under the influence, and you didn't have another one for 6 years, they wiped it off your record. Now, I'm sure in the basement of the courthouse somewhere was a sheet, you know, a folder or something. But if you had another DUI now, it's treated as a first offense. That's all gone. Now, it lasts a lifetime, a lifetime. You can't rent a car in Canada. You can't rent a car in Mexico. You ever had a DUI, okay? and it follows you. And if you have a second one, 25 years later, it's handled as a second offense, very serious, 2 weeks in a coerced treatment and so forth and so on. Probably cost you $5,000, $10,000. So the world has changed. It's much more dramatic now. And so a DUI, if you say, well, the good things about using, I feel good, I feel happy, it makes me a good dancer. Ladies, does it make them a good dancer? Yeah. No, it just makes them oblivious when they step on your feet, okay? So that's what they're equating, and then they're saying DUI, like they're equivalent. They're not equivalent. One has a time value on it that's perpetual. A broken relationship, usually perpetual. A lost job, bad, leaves at the worst an open blank in your occupational history. Medical problems, legal problems, destructive problems of all kinds. They're not equivalent. You know, if you win the lottery in the U.S., say you win $1 million, you go down to the office, you present your ticket, you say, I'd like the $1 million. I got an armored car waiting outside. They say, whoa, 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 whoa. You're not getting $1 million. You're getting $623,000. They say, whoa, whoa, wait a minute. I want $1 million. They said, well, if you want to get $50,000 a year for 20 years, we'll give you the $1 million. But if you want it all now, $623,000, because there is a time value to money, okay? Well, there's a time value to the bad things about drinking and drugging that follows you pretty much for a lifetime, assuming you live, obviously. Probably no one ever died from one drink of alcohol, but we know, especially in the epidemic in the US, you could certainly die from one shot of heroin. We had the Boston Celtics, a very famous basketball team, and they had the first draft pick, the best college player in the US, Len Bias. They picked him. They gave him a $6 million bonus, probably the equivalent of 20, 25 million now. And he decided to celebrate with cocaine and dead, okay? So this is always the chance with every dose. Heart attacks, strokes, death, endocarditis, all this stuff. And people are thinking about it as a CBA, and they're equating it. So I do the CBA differently. It goes like this. So there's good and there's bad about drugs and alcohol or other addictions. And then there's a short term and a long term. Now, we sometimes find some long-term benefits to alcohol. I don't see any long-term benefit to heroin or coke or anything like that, but there alcohol, we say, hey, you know, maybe there's some health benefits. I think the studies on balance show there's no real benefits to it. There are various permutations of the studies that argue against this, but yeah, it's kind of trivial. So, you know, if one drink a day, maybe it does improve your health 2% or something, but we're talking about people in a recovery group. We're not talking about the general public. So in a recovery book, it's absolutely trivial. But anyway, there's some social situations that you'll be ostracized from if you don't drink, you know, like the local soccer club. They may not like you if you're not getting sloshed after. Doesn't make any difference if a win or a loss, you're going to get sloshed. But they don't like it, maybe, if you don't do it. So there are a few maybe vague kind of benefits to drinking. You know, maybe you're an urnophile, you like the taste, and you know all about the different vintages and everything. You belong to an urnophile club. But it's hard to find these things. So pretty much these are short term. Better, high, and makes me relaxed, and social lubricant, and all of this. And maybe hangover. And then, but down here, usually, by the time somebody's coming to a recovery meeting, this is what you have. Long term. The consequences are long term. They're weighty. They're profound. They're destructive. The good things are temporary, brief, and yes, it's a benefit. I don't think there's any doubt about it. If it wasn't a benefit, no one would be doing it. We were doing something like this once we were doing a straight CBA in a meeting, and we got up to about 27 benefits. People had different benefits they wanted to talk about. And one guy said, stop, don't go anymore. Okay, you know, he just couldn't take it. So this is it. So this is what you usually end up with, and this is why most people stop. They stop because this thing begins to invert. The benefits clearly are short-term. The consequences now increasingly long-term, more and more destructive, more weighty, and then finally they stop. But a few people stop because really of their value system. I once took a poll. I went around the group. There were 10 people there. And I asked them, why do you want to stop? And 8 out of the 10 talked about all the pileup of the negative experiences and the destructive experiences that they were having. And finally gets to the point where they say, okay, that's it, time out. 2 of them was a little different. They kind of looked off into the sky like this, and they said, well, I have things I want to do. I have things I want to accomplish. And, I finally figured out I'm never going to get there if I keep using. So this is a different kind of a motivation, but more of a values-based proposition. And it depends on their being able to look into the future and scope out what is really happening, what is going to happen, to project. We're human beings. We can do this. We can look into the future. In prison, it's tough to get people motivated. Life's boring, and pretty much they're maybe, and I'm talking about non-coerced meetings. Most of my prison meetings, people are not coerced. They're coming voluntarily. Hard to get them motivated. So I dreamt up this idea. I said, I want you to close your eyes. And you can do this at your meeting. I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to visualize what your life is going to be like in 10 years if you don't stop. And I turn on the lights, and I give them about 5 full minutes. And I say, okay, now I want you to visualize what's going on in your life if you do stop 10 years from now. And I give them another 5 minutes. And in the end, what happens is, turn the lights on, you'll see a couple of people have tears running down their face. Most of them have what typical people would have, the house with a white picket fence and a spouse and kids and so forth. And a few say, I didn't see anything. They just can't do that. But that visualization is, I think, powerful. Some people use their right brain more than their left brain. They're more visually oriented. We have a technique called disarm, which I don't want to go into now, to fight urges. But it's an acronym, Destructive Self-Talk, Awareness and Refusal Method. And one of the facilitators called me up once and said, hey, some people, it's more an image that they see than words. The self-talk is more in images than words. I said, well, that's very convenient because we've been using the I in destructive for the I in disarm, and now we'll change it. We'll say destructive imaging and self-talk, awareness and refusal method. Incidentally, we're the same thing with SMART. SMART is an acronym, as you know, and we had a tough time finding a name. First, I can't remember the first one. The second one was target recovery. Very difficult now to find a common name that you can trademark. When we got to SMART, finally we found nobody seemed to have that trademark, and we named the organization and we trademarked it. And then afterwards, we backed into the acronym, Self-Management and Recovery Training. So we weren't geniuses. We were just lucky, just a coincidence. Okay, I'm going to stop now. There's about 5 minutes left for questions, comments, critiques. We love critiques in Smart Recovery, We don't know everything. And we're not smarter than anybody else. Anybody have any questions or thoughts or suggestions? You know everything you have to know about this? Here's a thought, yeah. No? Okay. All right, that's it then. You're released from bondage.